My basic purpose is to kind of set straight the evolution of the railroad in Simsbury and the various stations, the various service points that the railroads established. You were fortunate to have two railroads for a good period of time, about 50 years. The Canal Railroad running north-south and the what was originally the Connecticut Western running east-west, eventually morphed into the Central New England until that lasted until 1927 under the New Haven Railroad. A whole intricate story of the railroads and their evolution, which we won't get into a whole lot of that. So we're pretty much going to stick with the depots. I have printed up a timeline, which hopefully all of you have. There's extra copies over on that table. Just to clarify in my own mind, if nowhere else, and I'm not sure I've clarified it completely, what happened when. And of course that could be, probably 2 pages long with a lot more detail, but I try to keep it to a minimum so it didn't get too complicated. So you can consult that from time to time as we go through the various stations and the various parts of the talk. So it never works, much like this headset. Okay, I just put this up as kind of a intro piece. In some ways, it kind of symbolizes the complications and the ultimate demise of the New Haven Railroad. If you look closely at this document, it's a $5,000 bond. This is unissued. And it said, registered refunding consolidated mortgage 4% 50-year gold bond, secured by refunding consolidated mortgage of the New Haven and Northampton Company. Does anybody know what that means? The New Haven Railroad got into this financing and refinancing business that probably would make Bernie Madoff look like a charlatan. Trading stock of one of its subsidiaries for another, issuing new bonds. It's a crazy history, and we won't get into it, but I thought it was a beautiful certificate to start off with. All right, so Rails and Trails, the Iron Horse in Simsbury. In chapters, we're going to cover the Canal Railroad first because that was the original, running north and south from Weetog in the more southerly part of town up to the Granby line, as far as you're concerned. Of course, it ran from New Haven to the Massachusetts line and into Northampton as a canal first, and then the railroad followed. The canal, I think, is probably undersold. I didn't catch Carl's talk the other night, but I'm sure he dealt with the history of the canal a little bit, at least, in addition to introducing maps. But I think the canal is probably undersold in overall social and economic impact because for 20 years it did transport freight and people up and down an 85 mile length and really established an industrial corridor in places like Cheshire and Hamden and Southington, Plainville, Simsbury, and into Massachusetts. This newspaper article, which I rely heavily on, speaks of George Barker opening a store at Avon. And of course, he's getting his goods off via the canal. And much as the canal was mass transit of the day, locating by the canal was, of course, an economic convenience and in some cases a necessity. So that's 1835. In doing the research, and I forgot to check on Bickford's first name, I came across this for Ensign Bickford, the origins of the company, which I think go back to 1835. This is an 1839 article, 1841 article that's advertising the safety fuse that company was manufacturing. And I happen to notice the name of the sales rep, who was A.G. Hazard. So of course I immediately thought of Hazardville. That's not too big a stretch for most of us. And there's been a book recently written, and of course Hazardville black powder Augustus G. Hazard was, you know, kind of a notable in his day for the town that was founded in his name and the operation over there. There was an interesting coincidence that he's the one that's sales rep for the safety fuse. So people purchasing his black powder, maybe later, would not blow themselves up. And of course, the canal again has a long 20-year history, not that long. It didn't make much money. The bottom line was not that good. But again, I think that ignores the social value to some extent and the economic value. Even today, we kind of discount the railroads that are remaining in terms of access to markets and even commuting convenience, and don't always factor in the economic value. This is an interesting book I ran across at, I think, the Madison Public Library. There's not too many copies in the state. 1941, one of the WPA projects. Joseph Sheffield is the guy that was instrumental in turning the canal, which of course had its problems: leakage, no water, too much water, angry farmers, punching holes in it because they didn't want to give their land in the first place. So Sheffield came along, and of course the emerging technology of the time was the iron horse, which in its original incarnation was pretty rudimentary. This is the locomotive. This is the stack. You're boiling water in here to create steam. Here's the tender, which is basically a little flat car with 2 barrels of wood. And the original cars were basically stagecoaches with flange wheels, the inside rim to keep the cars on the rails. There was an evolution over time. Here's a 4-2-2 style locomotive based on wheel configuration, and that would evolve. 440 became the standard American locomotive, and the first locomotive on the canal line was the Cheshire, which is up here in the railway bulletin. 12-24-47 it was delivered. Didn't come up this far because the railroad here didn't open until 1850. So what was it like when the first train came to town? We don't have anything from up here, but we do have these articles transcribed from the Derby Journal. Did you hear that whistle yesterday afternoon at 15 minutes before 3 o'clock? The whistle of the locomotive of the Naugatuck Railroad announced the fact that the iron horse was on its way to our town, and before we could fully recover our surprise, the animal stood on the track near Derby Landing, puffing away as though it had been stealing sheep, and the officers were in pursuit. And the next week, this was a weekly paper, on he bounded like an enraged maniac, followed by his train of gloomy-looking cars. And he roamed a certain distance to the end of the track, which I think was Seymour at the time, or Humphreysville, as it was called then. So imagine the excitement in 1850 when the same thing happened up here. Reactions were probably pretty much the same. Canal Railroad is completed as far as Terriffill, and this is January 14th, 1850. And note the Terriffill terminus. The end of the line was not here in Simsbury. There was intent to go to Terriffill and beyond, and we'll talk about that more later. This is from the annual report of the railroad itself, and verifying cars running regularly to Terriffill in January, to Collinsville, separate branch, coming off at Farmington in February of the present year, 1850. Article from the paper advertising trains for Terriffill as a destination. Come to the cattle show, 1850, take the railroad. The 1855 Hartford County Atlas has, no, actually it's a single map, it's a huge map, with all of the towns in Hartford County in color. It's a beautiful production. We see up here a triangular shaped junction and the spur going over to Terraville and the depot here at the end. That configuration is called a Y, and if you have to ask, I'll tell you that it's because the track is in the shape of a Y, and that's a very advantageous arrangement for the railroad because from any direction you could come forward, back up, and then turn around. So instead of having a turntable, which was more expensive to install, to flip the engine around, you could simply bring your train, entire trains, within reason, I guess, depending on how big the Y was, and turn a train, certainly an engine, and a couple of cars, and just go in the opposite direction. So that's what they did at Hoskins. In one of my jaunts out west, I came across a town that's called Y, and I asked why. And apparently it's because that intersection actually used to form a Y, as in two roads blending into one, much like the railroad Y. So when it came to name the town, they couldn't name a town officially the letter Y, so they named it WHY. A little piece of railroad trivia that you come upon as you travel. And of course, there's why not North Carolina. Of course, the answer has to come back, why not? And if you're really scraping for additional questions, there's always where Massachusetts. And this is starting to sound like the Abbott and Costello routine that you probably remember. 1851 timetable shows again Terraville as the terminus. Couple trains up, couple trains down. First passenger, second passenger freight, extra one train on a Saturday. Your own Colonel Mather of Simsbury became the president of the continuation of the line further up north from Granby, and that was under the corporate name of the Farmington Valley Railroad. That was completed in 1854. So you now in Simsbury had a way to get to New Haven as well as to Westfield, Mass. And the advantage of Westfield, Mass was that it connected there with the Western Railroad, which had been built to Albany, New York. So that was a real boon to transportation and the movement of people and goods. You may or may not know that originally something called strap rail was used. Railroads were initially built on the cheap, and it was cheaper to get a wood stringer and put a strap of rail on top of it. This is actually a misnomer. In 1854 you would have iron, not steel strap rail. But most all the railroads started off that way, and in the late 1840s were converting, actually maybe 1854 steel. That's a little on the early side, but my Bessemer dates are off. That may be possible. But in frequent cases, the end of the rail would curl up over time and actually rip through the cars. This looks a little comical, but it wasn't a funny matter when an iron snakehead came ripping through the car and injured a lot of people. We have some documents that I don't need to linger on. Unfortunately, we don't have more, but we do have occasionally receipts going from the station agents to the bank on behalf of the railroad. What do we have here? Simsbury, $35.13, maybe 50, yeah, 35.13. The penny made a difference in those days. So we're talking, pennies here. How many tickets that represented in terms of sales, we don't know because we don't exactly have the price of the ticket. We don't know where the people were traveling. The fares varied, of course. You could get from Simsbury to Weetag for a nickel, and Simsbury to Terraville for a nickel. And the fares varied, of course, by distance. This is 1851. We also, in very limited cases, are fortunate to have a weekly ticket report. This one's from Granby, and I'm frankly not sure where I found this. I would have to look in my files, but Granby, May of 1870. And we're talking 2 tickets to Simsbury sold at the Granby station, 20 cents each, total yield of 40 cents. I'm not sure why this particular week is so slow, but it is only a week. And this kind of document, if you plugged all 3 together, you may be able to tell something about volume of traffic. Unfortunately, these documents are few and far between. The 1869 Baker and Tilden Atlas of Hartford County shows railroad station here, pretty much where Plan B is now, more or less, maybe a little south of that. Probably, in fact, south of that. The exact locations of these stations are, that's what Al Weaver, my friend over here, and I try to go out, and Craig Michelson also, where we go out into the wilderness and try to determine these locations. I threw this in because the canal, the railroads often hired entertainers and worked with local amusement parks in later days. The trolley companies did the same thing. Here the Canal Railroad was paying Captain Boynton for exhibitions up at Southwick Ponds, which is of course just across the line. So the Canal Railroad was working together with local businesses to drum up sales on the railroad. Not a bad idea. By 1884, the canal line actually, I put it on the timeline, the canal line initially was leased by the New York and New Haven Railroad, so it would not be a competitor to the Hartford and New Haven. They leased it in 1848, and the lease was for 21 years, oddly enough. So it didn't break free until 1869 and become an independent railroad on its own. But by 1884, as you can see, up into Massachusetts, there's the Collinsville branch, there's the branch to Holyoke, which you can't see, there's the Williamsburg branch, and basically all the way to the Hoosac Tunnel, or Hoosick Tunnel. Branch to Shelburne, well, Shelburne Falls is here, Turner's Falls. So it actually became quite a competitive railroad in its own right by 1884. In 1887, it was leased again by what was then the New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad to basically eliminate competition, because that's what the New Haven was interested in doing. So let's look at Hoskins Junction first as the first stop. That's about 2 miles above Simsbury, and a very interesting location. This is from my Google Earth map, on which I have attempted, with Al's help, to place correctly all the railroad stations in Connecticut. This is the Connecticut Western Line coming down here from Terriffill. This didn't open until 1871. It's in red because all of these are abandoned. This is the Canal Line branch to Terriffill, and that opened, as we saw, in 1850. Again, the branch to Terriffill, it doesn't show on this map, although this is 1855, it doesn't really show a station. I put an arrow where eventually Hoskins Station would be. And if we look at this timetable of 1859, we see Simsbury, Hoskins Junction for that Y, Terriffill a mile beyond, and then back to Hoskins, because there was no place to go from Terriffill. So they used the Y again to back the train up and turn it in the other direction, or go north to Granby. But this, first of all, brings up the contradiction in names. Hoskins Junction as opposed to Hoskins. Was there a station there? We don't know. Actual station building. We don't know. Maybe just a platform. Maybe nobody got off there because it was kind of rural, and in fact maybe people did. The original name of Hoskins was supposedly Westover, so that may indicate that there was a station up here. This is the 1869 Baker and Tilden map, still showing the branch to Terriffill. This is a valuation map from that the federal government forced the railroads to do as they're part of the regulatory process they inflicted on them in the early 1900s, because the railroads were ripping people off, especially in the West with high prices for grain shipments. Interesting note here, the operation of the Terriffill branch was discontinued in 1869, tracks taken up in 1870. Valuation maps don't usually have this kind of information. It's kind of interesting that it's here, but it's a clue that this branch here, in fact, was abandoned in 1869, which coincides with the date that the New Haven and Northampton became independent. So they weren't interested in the Terriffill branch anymore, and the reason probably was because of the big fire in 1867, which kind of decimated the mill operation, the carpet company, and threw, according to this article, 2,000 people out of work. I don't know if that figure can be verified. I didn't look up the population. It's hard to believe that even as large an operation as it was, that the Hartford Carpet Company would be employing 2,000 people in Terriffill. But in any case, production was down. Apparently, the canal line was not interested in that branch anymore. So it went by the wayside. Tracks torn up in 1870. This is an older Hoskins station, presumably. The dress, it's a little confusing. The people look like they're dressed for, I don't know, they look like they could be in the 1930s. Those hats, I mean, I'm not a costume expert. Other people are, whatever, welcome to weigh in. But this probably was the older Hoskins station. Hoskins is on the topographic map here. And again, here's the line from, this is 1892. Here's the Connecticut Western coming in. Here's the canal line. Shows the station right here at the, what's that, Route 315? I believe, can't keep these numbers straight. Thank you. And it shows the station on the east side of the track, which is actually the Connecticut Western side. So I'm thinking that in the process of discontinuing the branch, the canal line got rid of the Hoskins station as well and handed it over to the Connecticut Western, because they weren't stopping there anymore. This is part of the streamlining process. And in fact, we read in the newspaper in 1871 that the Connecticut Western has taken the roadbed of the canal road at Hoskins from Hoskins to Simsbury, shifting the latter track to a new roadbed, which I'm assuming is to the west. So the Connecticut Western is running on the east side, parallel down to Simsbury, and the canal line is on the west side, because they swapped roadbeds. And maybe that's why the station was given up. Old Shed Station at Hoskins, which may be what we saw in the picture, is being torn down, has been torn down. This is 1899. And a new station, better fitted for the accommodation of passengers, is to be built. That's November of 1899, so I give it a date of 1900 as the new station. This is the map, the valuation map. You can see frame, passenger station, you can't see, but it says FP. There's the Central New England going over to Terriffill, and here's the canal line going to Granby. We are fortunate to have a set of pictures taken by Lewis Herbert Benton, little slip of the tongue there, Lewis Herbert Benton. He and this guy, Irving Drake, drove all over Connecticut and Rhode Island in the, actually Benton started in the teens in Massachusetts. That's Drake's car. It appears in a lot of the photographs. Drake is usually posed in front of the station or doing some kind of antics, like climbing on top of the station. And here's Hoskins. So this is probably the this is, I think, 1929, because that fits with the date that they were taking pictures in this area. And this would be the replacement station at Hoskins. which lasted probably until the end of the C&E. This is looking south at where the station used to be. This is a PUC photograph from 1937, and no station. And the track is truncated now here at the highway. So this is the line that used to go to Terriffill. In this picture, that's the line to Terriffill, and this is to Granby. And if you look closely, there's a boxcar parked here for interchanging between railroads. Of course, by that time, 1929, it was all New Haven anyhow. But, you know, still transferring cars to go over to Terriffill or up the line. Al Weaver has done a marvelous job with what I call the ghost photograph. So this is looking north from the site of the Hoskins station, and he pastes ghosts onto these pictures. So there's Irving Drake, and there's Al's car, I believe, whenever this was taken a few years ago. And now it's gone again. So again, Hoskins Junction, Hoskins Station, Connecticut Western, Canal Line Branch, 1850, torn out 1870. Weetog. I think we have somebody here from the Weetog part of town who is actually inquiring. That's about 2 miles south of Simsbury. 1855 map, 1869 map, both show station. In 1886, the people were complaining that we don't really have a station here. And so what happened? Apparently it had burned, and the canal line, being cheap and economical, had not replaced it. So they petitioned to the railroad commissioners. This is from the files that I processed at the State Library. And they petitioned, prayed for, authority to refer, blah, blah, blah. The commissioners actually didn't have the power initially to order a railroad to build a station. But increasingly, by the late 1880s, they did, and were powerful enough to say that we require and recommend within 60 days from the date that the New Haven and Northampton Company erect and maintain hereafter at the site of the former depot building its Weetog Station, a platform with portion covered and enclosed, suitable for accommodation of passengers. And that's what we find standing later, 1910. And a better picture, although it's not the greatest picture, this is about the best we have, of partially enclosed, just as they asked for, and partially sheltered, but enclosed, unenclosed, but sheltered, 1916. These valuation photos are part of the regulatory work of the federal government. The railroads had to take pictures of all their stations. They had to draw maps of all their lines. I think they had to take pictures of the rolling stock, although I've never seen any of those, so that the federal government could determine their actual worth and stop them from overcharging the public. Crossing accident at Weetog, 1910. By 1911, they determined to put up a bridge. Crossing accidents were as common then as, unfortunately, sometimes even today. They put up a bridge in 1911. There's the map of what they did. Passenger station is down here. Passenger and freight, actually, probably. They built a little detour onto Route 10, put a bridge here, and then merged the road back into the old road, looking like this with that bridge overpass. Of course, if you notice the configuration of the bridge, it's kind of an S-curve kind of thing. Well, people would come barreling up over the bridge and, of course, crash on this side, crash on that side, because, like now, they drive too fast. So in 1952, Motors was injured. 1972, the PUC says, take the grade crossing out. It was delayed a little bit, but by December 72, grade crossing was out because there was not the train traffic that was once had to be protected against. And wouldn't you know it, a couple of years later, a train engine derails right at the crossing, blocks the crossing. It took how many hours to clear it, but that's kind of Murphy's Law. Weetog Station 1, 2, and 3, there were actually 3 stations over time, 1848, 1894, 1886, 1894, south of the crossing. And that's the crossing today, looking south. That's Al's superimposition of where the station used to be, and again, it's vanished. The Connecticut Western comes in 1871 and basically builds up from Hartford through Simsbury, into Simsbury Center, Stratton Brook, and on to Canton and Winsted and New York State. This is not, well, railroad related. Mr. Holcomb and White of East Canton cooperating with prominent citizens of Farmers Village, which I believe is that section of Simsbury where Stratton Brook is. That's an alternate or an older name. They've been fitting up a grove near Stratton Brook Station on the land of T.R. Case. Case is a big name in Canton. Craig and I were just talking about the Case name. And they're putting up a grove here for picnics, a substantial dancing platform, seats, railings, tables, bountiful supply of provisions, good music, etc. I don't know if that's a local note to be made. Maybe it's better known than I thought or think, but I thought the interesting connection here was the reference to Stratton Brook Station, which of course came with the Connecticut Western in 1871. As far as a building, we read in 1874 that presumably there was only a platform here, that the 1874 was the date that the foundation for a station was actually laid, and proposed to push the structure to rapid completion. That's November of 1874. Mr. Benjamin, another Case, recently purchased land from Case, another Case, Anson Case, and is going to supply 22,000 ties to the Connecticut Western Railroad at Stratton Brook. There's also a problem with tramps, which may or may not have been common, always along railroad tracks, right? The hobos of the 1930s. There's the Stratton Brook Station. This, I believe, is looking north, if I got my directions correct. That's looking west. That's looking south. PUC photograph. There's the inspection car that was bringing the commissioners around, 1924. And that's looking, that would have to be west also. I thought we had an east in here. The station disappears by 1937. There doesn't appear to be a station here. It could be back here, but the 1934 aerial doesn't show it, so I think it was gone by this time. There's the post where you pulled on the rope and raised this paddle to stop the train. This was called a flag stop, and that's how you flagged the train. There's the overview from Google Earth. There's the position of the station. This is Town Forest Road. This is Stratton Brook Road. Al has done this kind of multiple superimposition. That's the 1934 aerial. The station is not there, so that's why I'm saying it was gone by that time. There's looking down Town Forest Road. There's the station, and again, it's vanished. There's Bill Curtis's caboose, parked off of West Street, over in the west side of Simsbury. Tower Station is one of the more fascinating, located just south of the Tariffville Station. It was actually built apparently by Mr. Bartlett, and with the prospect of trains stopping there and increasing business for the tower, Bartlett's Tower.
What would you like to say to JT?
This 1872 article says, of course, with the coming of the railroad, now that the cars can take passengers almost to the base of Talcott Mountain, it's a very easy thing for Litchfield County folks to come over to visit the tower. And if any of them take our advice and go and are not satisfied, we can tell them where to go. Or we will advise them to go somewhere else, more or less. The same, I think the same meaning is implied. Opening May 30th, this is the 1881 newspaper, includes use of telescope, lunching tables, piano, dancing platforms, swings of the latest approved style. I don't know if there's a swing historian here who can tell us what that means. Croquet, hammocks, etc., etc. I think there was a bowling alley put up there also. The tower burned, I think, 3 times and was reconstructed. But this is 1881. So in terms of train service, to the tower we can go by rail. The Connecticut Western has made arrangements for daily excursions, and the conveyance will be by rail to Simsbury. Oh, Simsbury. I was reading that somehow as Terriffill. Okay, which just doesn't make any sense. From the station there to the foot of Mount Phillip, I'm not exactly sure where that is, and then up the tower, I guess, from the west side, and returning by the same route. Okay, so that's from Simsbury. By 1889, we read that if a party of 15 go, and I guess if there was less than 15, you had to go to the Terriffill station, the train stops at Mr. Bartlett's station, a quarter of a mile from the tower. And we'll see where that is momentarily. That is the station, and Al and I found this at the Connecticut Historical Society, and we're flabbergasted because I don't think any other picture of this station exists. And you can see the tower up there. This other view actually looks from Andrus Ledge, I guess in East Granby, across the river, and you can see the station down there. I mean, that's, of course, a chance circumstance, but actually it's labeled. Opposite Bartlett Tower, showing by now what was the Philadelphia, Reading, and New England Tower Station and the Farmington River, and the tower is up there. So pretty cool. 6,000 visitors in 1891, 3,000 by rail. So that's some pretty heavy traffic. And of course, picnic, whatever, Sunday school picnics, and church groups, and Sunday schools, and missions, and churches, and probably military regiments. Everybody's going to Bartlett Tower. Special car attached to the train, arriving here at 7 p.m. last Friday evening. This is from probably from the Winstead Herald. Tower pavilion grounds were lighted up for the occasion. 1895, did they have electricity up there at that point? Somebody may be able to tell us. Bartlett's Tower, 1898. Bartlett Tower burns, 1936. Tower fire visible for miles. Al Weaver places Tower Station pretty much at the foot of Mountain Road, and I'll go by his judgment. I don't think this is all that precise, but this is about as good as we can do for the time being. But if not here, up the road a little bit. The track, of course, was right here at the time. Okay, on to the even better stuff. Not that any of that wasn't good. Terriffill it has held a fascination for me since probably for 50 years when I first started delving into this railroad stuff and actually came up here with my sister in the middle of a winter, and there was like 3 feet of snow on the ground, and we're traipsing around walking on the top of the crusted snow trying to figure out where the railroad was in Terriffill. Just insanity. But that's what some of us do, as little sense as it makes. At the New Haven Museum, they have an index map of the canal line, and that's actually an atlas of the canal line from 1848 with subsequent alterations. So it's like the original atlas that the railroad put together and used to record subsequent changes in the right-of-way. And if you look at the Terriffill section of Simsbury, you find the spur identified, and this is the railroad station. So not too shabby a station. I don't know if I have a clear enough image to get the measurements, but I don't know, 25 by 50. And in fact, if you look at the 1850 map, so all right, so this is the track, this is the station, this may be a separate freight house. I can't say that for sure. But follow this track around, like down here, and curves around to the carpet factory. So the track actually ended, I mean the depot was here, but there was actually rail service right to the carpet factory. And ending pretty much, well, maybe a little short of where we were just looking where Tower Station stood. So again, this line was pulled out in 1869, presumably, or 1870, so this was taken up. And of course, the next year, the Connecticut Western builds on probably the same right-of-way or adjacent to it, and builds its track through Terriffill. The piers for the original bridge over the Farmington River, not to be confused with the Terriffill Bridge that collapsed in 1878, but this is the bridge for the spur. These are the abutments and/or I don't know if the piers, well, these are piers in the middle of the river. I don't think the abutments on either side are there, but pretty simple piles of stone. This wasn't anything elaborate, but they are still in the river as of last I knew. John Nagy, who is in the audience? Okay, I thought I recognized you, John. Took Al and I a couple of years ago to see this. So I was kind of flabbergasted. I think Al was too, that these were still in the ground. So that's pretty cool. I came across some payroll sheets someplace for the New York and New Haven Railroad serving the Terriffill station. Here's first initial B, Phelps, which is a familiar name up here, and last name Gorman as the helper. $1 a day for the helper, 27 bucks for the month. Mr. Phelps apparently got paid on a monthly basis, so there's no dollar figure here. Apparently he was on a, whatever, supervisory payroll. 2 engineers working the Terriffill branch trains. Again, October 1851. It's pretty phenomenal that any of this survives, even these scant fragments. 2 engineers and 2 brakemen. So running the Terriffill branch, which implies actually that there was a separate little train that they had waiting at Hoskins to go back and forth to Terriffill. I can't prove that, but branch service kind of indicates that it had its own little, tiny little staff of personnel. 1878, this is the bridge that collapsed in the accident of January 1878. And this is the Simsbury, the Connecticut Western number 9 coming to the rescue. Craig sent me this photograph courtesy of Leroy Boujan, who is in California and is probably the foremost central New England historian today. Well, this is the most in all of this research that I've done, this may be the most interesting little tidbit that I came across ever. 1892, May 12th. The old building used as the railroad depot at Terriffill was destroyed by an incendiary fire on Wednesday evening of last week. That would be May 4th. It belonged to the Consolidated Road and was erected when the company's branch track extended across the meadows, the branch from Hoskins. The CNE&W, as the Connecticut Western evolved, road had used it for 20 years. So if you do the math, that's 1872. So from 1872, in other words, this station was built in 1850 for service on the branch line, went out of business in 1870 when the branch was torn up, sat unused until the Central New England or the Connecticut Western came along and used it for 20 years and burned in 1892. I was, not to overuse the term flabbergasted, but I was. So that not only explained what the Connecticut Western used, but it also explained the fate of the Canal Lines depot, and of course what the Connecticut Western did for 20 years for a depot in Terriffill. They will now build a depot on the opposite side of the track and nearer to the center of the village. The loss will hardly exceed $200. They were always disparaging with these values. This is the station that's still standing, which we'll talk about more in the next last chapter here. This is standing in Simsbury along Iron Horse Boulevard. And this may very well be the type of station that they built at Terriffill. We'll never know. But the footprint actually does not look like it would be impossible to have had this station standing at the end of the branch in Terriffill. New railroad station is being built across the track from the site of the old structure. And the new railroad station, although not finished, is far enough advanced to be used by the station agent. Unfortunately, I forgot this part. This is the same, this is another newspaper. This is the Winstead Herald. This is priceless. The Terriffill Railroad Station burned the other night. It was the meanest, shabbiest, dirtiest, and most disgraceful hog pen on the road between Hartford and Poughkeepsie. Through courtesy known as an alleged railroad station, excepting, of course, that ancient old arc on the flat, which in Winstead is a section of Winstead, like the center of Winstead, where the station there was reviled as much as this one apparently was. So much for pretty stations. The 1893 Herd Atlas shows railroad station here, now on the opposite side of the track, closer to town, marginally. Original station probably was here, maybe a little, maybe at the ampersand. This view looks over from East Granby again. There's the bend in the track. What's up here? I think I talked to John about this, and we were doubtful that this actually shows the station. I would love, of course, that be the little station there, but I think that may be an overreach. But it's always nice to try. A part of the fascination for Terriffill is the fact that the big battle for the Central New England line to Springfield took place largely there and in East Granby. Bob Adams wrote a nice article in 1978 called "The Battle for Springfield," how the East, the tale of how the East was won. The major sticking point was the fact that the New York, New Haven, and Hartford still owned the right-of-way, even though the branch was torn up in 1870. Maybe that's why it's on the Val map, to affirm that ownership. To go to Springfield, the Central New England had to cross just the tippity end of the canal line, you know, without going like around, I don't know, way out of its way. So a big brouhaha developed over the right to cross that track. Do they have to go under it? Do they have to tunnel under it? To the right-of-way. There was no track, but the right-of-way was still owned by the New York, New Haven, and Hartford. The other part of the battle, of course, was fought up here at Montague Farm, which we won't get into. I mean, that's a whole talk in itself. 313 feet of land in this strip was purchased surreptitiously by the New York, New Haven, and Hartford and withheld for a year and a half, forcing the East Granby and Suffield to be built as a loop to go around this blockade. Cost $60,000, and after it was completed, a year later, suddenly the farm became available for $60. Who was responsible for this? Probably this guy, J.P. Morgan, if he's not recognizable otherwise. But the Central New England went on with its plans. the Y connecting, let's not get into the Y again, but they connected their tracks with a Y for that convenience of running trains all which ways in Terraville. That's the original railroad bridge, replaced by the iron one that subsequently came down. That's going to Springfield. And there's the station that they built in 1903, Central New England, building a new passenger station between the tracks of the main line and those of the Springfield branch. So here's your Y. This is coming from Hartford. You could go to Simsbury, you could go to Springfield, and of course Springfield could go to Simsbury, and all which ways, with the convenience of a Y. There's the valuation map. And you'll notice on this corner of the station, there's this projection. That's the agent's bay, so that he could look down the track. And with the positioning of the station right on the bend here, and this being a very tight curve, he needed to look in 3 directions. So instead of the agent's bay placed in the center of the station, looking this way and that way, they put it on the corner of the station so he could look in 3 directions. Very, very clever. And if you look at this view, you can actually see the bay on the southeast corner of the station. Again, that's to Springfield, that's to Simsbury, and back here is going to Hartford. That's the freight station down there. This is the view today. This is Main Street extended, I think. Basically, it follows the railroad track. This is virtually the track. Al Weaver has done the superimposition again. There's the station sitting in front of those apartment buildings. And here's another superimposition as well. That's 14, address where the picture was taken from. Last but not least is Simsbury itself, which presents its own challenges in understanding what was where. As we already said, the New Haven and Northampton came through in 1850. The Connecticut Western came through in 1871 on the east side, as it was finally laid out, on the east side of the canal line. Simsbury 3, as I have numbered the stations, is where Plan B is now. The original canal line station, which we'll see in a minute, was here. The Connecticut Western stations were here, right opposite each other. And Simsbury 1, the original canal line station, is now here, a little below Wilcox Street. That's that station. So this is an 1848 station. This is one of the oldest still standing in the state, arguably, and that's by a year or 2. There's nothing much older than this still standing. This one is fortunately very well kept. Nearby cousins, there's Simsbury, 1848. There's Granby, and you can see the obvious similarities in the hipped roof and the wide brackets. Combination station originally used for freight and passengers. And last but not least, hairdressing salon down at Riverdale Farms, which was the old Avon station, moved up from Route 44. So these, again, 1848 stations built by the New York and New Haven Railroad when at least for the period that at least the canal line. So these are actually built by the New York and New Haven. When Plan B was built, for referring to it as convenient, the original canal line station with the brackets was moved farther down the track and became the freight station. That was frequently done by the railroads. We didn't tear anything down if we could save it and repurpose it, unlike today. One of the reasons that I was interested in giving this talk, again, is kind of to set the record straight. This is labeled, I think, in Chet McCoyd's handwriting, who is actually a pretty good historian of railroads in Connecticut. And he labels this Simsbury, Connecticut rear view of the C&E station. It's the Canal Line station, as we have already proven. This is in 1985. It's up on a new foundation, obviously, and I don't know if somebody resides down below. It's the International Rug Group, is the shingle on the front. Well, of course, when the Connecticut Western came to town, it had to build its own station. God forbid it should cooperate with another railroad. Railroads, you know, there were multiple railroads in Connecticut, 20 or so, until the New York, New Haven, and Hartford took them virtually all over. And, you know, there was competition. So, and very often they would have separate stations, sometimes several in one town. And that became an obvious source of confusion as well as disconvenience for the public. So in 1873, we read that the Connecticut Western Railroad have just erected a huge and commodious depot at the corner of Phelps Avenue and Railroad Street. And directly opposite the antediluvial and dilapidated structure known as the Canal Line Depot. Antediluvial, for you Latin enthusiasts, means before the flood. So we're talking Noah and the Ark here. And, you know, again, people like to make fun of, if the railroad station was 10 years old, it was antediluvial. And to further the humor, a subsequent article says a few days ago, some of the section hands started to carry away the CW depot to eat their dinner in. So, like a lunchbox. It was 11 by 18. But the watchful agent overhauled them and caused them to drop it like a hot potato. So, completing the metaphor. 1874, the Canal Railroad has just put up a very respectable depot. It's because it's new. It says that I don't trust these distances. They don't actually jibe with what measurements that I've tried to take. But the Connecticut Western built one some months since, which I think means some months before, because it was already up, and described as 11 by 18 and 7 feet posts and whatever. That's the 1874 Canal Line station, now the Plan B restaurant. It was something, it's going through a succession of names. I can't remember the earlier one. One-way fare, right, the railroad. And I think there's another Plan B railroad station restaurant somewhere else in Connecticut. I forgot to look that up again. There's a little baggage building, which appears on the, I believe on the valuation map. Here's the brick enclosed water tower. There's a water tank, a wooden water tank inside of there that they enclose with brick for insulation purposes. And usually it's elevated and there's some heating mechanism down below, a little furnace. And here, of course, is the spout for dispensing water. You needed water to boil to create the steam for the steam locomotives. This, I believe, is from the Simsbury Historical Society. The monogram did not come out down here. It's, I think there's probably better copies of this available. Maybe this is not their copy. It shows a Canal Line train. We know it has to be after the New York, New Haven, and Hartford took it over, because the Canal Line did not have 44 engines. So this is sometime after 1887. And certainly after the 1874 station was built, and you can see the spout on the water tank. There's looking south, you can see the 1848 Canal Line station as freight house down here. We're looking south, this is the Canal Line station. This mechanism here is called a Dutch clock. There were cards that the station agent would put for the day, the type of train, and when it passed, so that the following train would know that it could not leave the station at least until 10 minutes. So to keep distance between the trains. This was before block signals and signal station towers and whatever, more sophisticated equipment. This is the Plan B in 1949, looking pretty forlorn. That's it today. Apparently, this baggage building is still standing also. Your fourth station came in 1881. The new depot of Connecticut Western is approaching completion. Station agent McKinney, I don't know if that name computes with any other connection. It is hinted that kid gloves and plug hats will be in order. But since the news doesn't come from a reliable source, we do not credit it, a little tongue-in-cheek. So there's your kid gloves and there's your plug hat, which is basically a derby, but kind of implies a little fancification. There's the station, old freight house, Canal Line freight house, big C&E water tank now. Boardwalk between the station, you can see it in the photograph. Vic Newton constructed this map. He's since passed away, several years, but he drew this outline of the Simsbury station facilities. 1874 station there, C&E station here, and boardwalk connecting the two. There's another view, old Canal Line station, big water tank, C&E station. And here's ladies of leisure at the station with horse and buggy, and kind of looking like, you know, the plug hat kind of connection. They look kind of fancied up for calling at the station. To the best of what I've been able to determine with Al Weaver, this station stood right about at the south end of the True Value hardware store, in what's now almost like this little wing, this thing here, which I speculated wildly yesterday. Wouldn't it be cool if this was the Connecticut Western station incorporated into this building? But that's probably not likely. C&E water tank, C&E station, Connecticut, Central New England and Western. This is from the Ramsdell photograph collection up in Thompson, Connecticut, that we're cataloging feverishly. Another map showing the layout of the two stations, track going off to Canton. 1911 wreck just across Hop Meadow Street at the mill. Train coming off this track was on this track, and eastbound passenger train rams into it. C&E loco number 229. That's the big hook. That's the wrecker cleaning up the mess. Account of the accident in the Springfield Republican, which I don't think there's anything particularly useful there, but I thought I would grab that anyhow for the record. More maps showing the outline of the facilities. At some point, about 1913, the Connecticut Western station here was eliminated, and it looks like a coal bin in its place. And what they're using, that could be off a little bit, and they're using the Canal Lines. All right, no, I'm off. That's actually still there, 1915. Somewhere in this time, the Plan B station became the sole station for Simsbury, 1914-15, somewhere in there. So 1, 2, 3, 4, your Simsbury stations. Some miscellaneous views, 1949. Is that the building that's still there? As part of, the one that's still there as part of True Value says Big Y on the side of it. So I'm not sure if that's the same building or a later one.
Yeah, it used to be Big Y.
Used to be what?
It used to be Big Y.
Okay.
Yeah.
C&E freight station, Canal Line freight station, obviously in rundown shape. That's also 1949. Simsbury station, Plan B, RS2 locomotive, if I looked it up correctly, 0503 on the New Haven Railroad, circa 1950. The rise and fall, that's a whole nother story of the New Haven Railroad. Overextension, bought too much, paid exorbitant prices, was sued by the federal government for antitrust violations, and forced to yield, sell off a lot of properties. But it survived until 1968. It actually fomented the Valuation Act, that regulatory effort by the federal government to get the railroads under control and to stop them from charging exorbitant prices. So I think I put on the timeline that the track north of Simsbury was out in 1976, and the portion south to Avon 81. And by 1985, you were getting state permission, I think, to do the first leg of the bike trail, which in town here is Iron Horse Boulevard. And I have a date on that of 1984 for this lower article. The bike trail actually, with portions in Cheshire coming to completion, shortly you will be able to ride literally from New Haven, excepting Plainville, they haven't figured out what to do with that, all the way to Northampton, I think, into Massachusetts. So it's pretty spectacular what they've achieved in preserving. If it can't be a railroad, it might as well be a rail trail. This is behind Plan B, old railroad crossing sign, track behind True Value, and going up to the other end. So rail is still in the ground. And people like us who go around looking for this are always happy to see this just as a remnant. Okay, my website is Tyler City Station. My business cards are over on that little table. And this is the end. Or is it? The research actually never stops. I mean, it's whatever, insatiable.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.